Hello and welcome to Think Ahead, a podcast from London Business School that brings you cutting-edge research, real-world insights, and expert analysis to tackle the most pressing challenges facing businesses and their leaders today. I'm your host, Sergei Guriev, Dean and Professor of Economics at London Business School. As D. Hawk, founder and former CEO of Visa, once said, an organization, no matter how well designed, is only as good as the people who live and work in it. And so in today's discussion, we'll explore how to unlock the power of purposeful teams. Whether you're managing a small team or leading a large organization, this episode will provide actionable strategies to help transform your team into a powerhouse of collaboration, growth, and success. I'm joined by two exceptional guests, Randall Peterson, Professor of Organisational Behaviour and Director of the Leadership Institute at London Business School, and Helen Beurier, Executive Education Alumna at London Business School and Chief People Officer at Newton. Randall and Helen, welcome to the Think Ahead podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with a very basic question. How do teams work? How do they reflect the values and the culture of organization? And how does that affect the dynamics within organization and contribute to organizational success?
Let's start with just the basic recollection. One of my very favorite quotes is a Margaret Mead quote. Of course, she was a very famous anthropologist from the 50s, 60s, 70s. And, her quote was really about, everything important in life starts with a small team. Even major political movements, right? It's the founding block of human societies across the world. And so any organization is really a collection of small teams. And there's something important that happens going from thinking about an individual, what they may do, to the dynamic that's occurred and the culture that's created around, when you've got several people working together. So that really is the core of any organization.
Absolutely. In that quote, as far as I remember, Margaret Mead actually emphasizes it's not just a small team, but also she mentions motivation and dedication of those people. And this is what brings us to Helen. What makes a team purposeful and effective team in a business organization?
Well, in my career, I've worked across a really wide variety of sectors. I had the good fortune to work in very large global multinationals and with the smallest of startups. And I think actually this sense of purpose really resonates most in those smaller organizations where there's a huge energy and dynamism around getting something started and taking an idea, taking creative thought and making something happen. And those small units of people are driving forward the mission, the values, and that purposeful direction of the organization. And the first question they're asking themselves is, why has this team been created in the first place? What is it that we're going to achieve together? And how are we going to track and measure those results? So to follow what Randall was saying, how you actually design your teams and you think very purposefully about the qualities, the capabilities, and even the personality traits that are going to drive your organization forward is what starts to create culture, what starts to create workplace experience. And that can be really the thing that helps a business to succeed or to fail. That purposeful choice of individuals and how they take sort of that strategic direction forward and create emotional kind of engagement to a vision.
Thank you, Helen. Randall, what would you say, how can a leader actually not just design a team, but also influence its culture?
Well, I'm going to build on some of the things that Helen talked about right away, which is, it's that kind of purposeful, this is what I need a team to do. And as a result, this is the way this group of people need to interact for this to actually start to happen. And so, the boss, the supervisor, the leader, whatever label you want to use, really has to go beyond bilateral relationships with individuals and really think about how's the rest of the group interacting? Because that's really where that sense of purpose comes from.
And when we talk about this, can we give an example how you actually create teams in a purposeful way when you shift the culture within the organization, and how does that affect organizational dynamics and organizational success?
So most of my career has been as an HR business partner, working with executives or executive teams to deliver transformational change. That's really been the bulk of what I've done for over 25 years. And most of that transformational change is starting with a new team design, a new structure, a new set of capabilities. And it's been my role to hire many of those teams. And I'm actually in the process of that right now at Newton, where we're building a new people team and a much more significant level of expertise and capability. So beyond defining what sorts of individuals and experiences I needed, it was also really important for me to feel that those individuals wanted that work and were feeling some affinity between where they wanted to go in their life and career and what we are looking to achieve as an organisation. And actually, Randall was my professor, I'm happy to say, as part of the SEP programme I experienced here in 23. And one of the things that we talked about was the Manual of Me. And actually, that's something that I used with my team very, very early on to say, let's be really clear about how we can get the best of each other. The Manual of Me process helps to explore, really as an instruction manual to an individual and how you can work with that person for the most optimal performance. And it was a really, really powerful exercise for us as a new team in exploring how the work we need to do to deliver our strategy can also resonate with some of our own personal ambitions and aspirations and respect also our boundaries. And I think that's within my own experience, that's been a super useful tool. And we can talk about sort of other companies, but it's a chance for me to say thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm really thrilled to hear that you're using it and it's effective in what you're doing. But, it really hits on, a basic truism about, it's you have to be brave as a leader, put it out there to start, right? Get people to actually share with how they really think. And then you have to connect what is good for the group with what's good for the individuals within the group. Yeah. Right, because we may spend a lot of time thinking about the individuals, and sometimes we think about what we need the group to do, but it's the connection between those things, right? So that everybody wins, the team wins, and the individuals within it, in order to make that team effective. And that's a strategy that I've used often. And I think about building the organizational behavior group here. We had a big building job when I came, and it was very much the same kind of thing. We had to have good conversations, make decisions about what we needed to be growing up as a group. And it wasn't just great research. Great research was necessary, but we needed and wanted a certain kind of person, the kind of person who was willing to work with others, because in many academic institutions that's not necessary. But we really felt that was important for this group. And people had interest in the outside world. We are a business school. We need to engage with the world of business, and there are loads of great scholars who have no interest in that. So it was like bringing all those things together and then figuring out kind of how that fit with the rest of what the school needed, what we needed as a group, and what those individuals, getting them to align.
Yeah, and the vulnerability, an individual needs to be ready to share for that to be successful. But that's an example of forming teams. I'm an ex-PepsiCo executive. I spent 10 years there under the leadership of Indra Nooyi. And Indra was somebody who brought in the business philosophy around performance with purpose, which you may be familiar with. And that was a really interesting example on clearly a much wider scale of really helping to balance business goals and strategy with early sustainability strategy. And that had a very significant impact on teams and team purpose, and also the way team results were measured. And that sort of cultural shift came from a very clear leadership direction and dynamic about what mattered as a business and the way that we would be assessing results.
So we've got two successful results of building teams, Organizational Behaviour group at London Business School and Newton. What would be a counterexample where leaders did not succeed in building the right teams in the right way? Anything that, Randall, you would teach in your class, as maybe without naming names, but just what differentiates success from failure?
Well, I don't think I have to worry about naming names because, quite frankly, it usually makes the news, particularly if it's of any size, right? So all you have to do is say, look for where they talk about toxic culture, right? And there's probably something there. So, one of the favorite examples I like to talk about is Uber. Uber succeeded by being tough, aggressive. If you want to get in the cab market into any city, right, there's an established order, and you're going to be disrupting that. Okay. And so to get in, you've got to have a really aggressive culture. But then they tried to build relationships. I don't even know how I'd call them teams. Everybody was an individual. It's very aggressive. And surprise, surprise, people aren't working together. Everybody feels isolated. Everybody feels like it's toxic, right? And they, of course, fired the founder and chief executive and started over with a new chief executive because there was a real mismatch between the idea of working together as an organization and the culture of what they had developed.
And that impacted not only internal organizational dynamic, but also external reputation of the organization.
Yeah.
Are these things connected?
For sure, right? If you really get this wrong, right, it does spill out, right? And all you have to do is go to places like Glassdoor. I always recommend in class, just read them, right? It's always the most cynical version, right, of your culture, but it reflects that. And I've read London business schools. I've read lots of big organizations, and the organizations I know, it's there, right?
It's probably a biased view, but it still reflects the truth, at least some version of the truth.
And the felt experience. Of individuals. I think what's difficult about Glassdoor, I say this as somebody who looks at it for the place I work at and places I worked at before, is that very often it's the people who have the most negative experience who want to be able to share that. And often it's not balanced by those who've had the really positive experience. But it's definitely, it is a place to go. It is a place to go.
Yeah, you always have to remember it's the most negative interpretation of the culture. In the same way that you hear jokes about London Business School as London Busyness School, right? As a kind of indirect kind of critique, it both is a problem in the sense that we stretch people really hard, but it's also our secret sauce, right? This place has outperformed since it began, in part because it is that school. So, people may complain about it, but if you understand how it connects to what you're trying to do, right, then, you can work it through. And yes, it's the most negative interpretation, but I would always found things like that useful for understanding whether the culture has gone off the rails.
So moving to the issues you already raised, the main components of successful teams being that incentives for performance, relationships, motivations. What would you say about this? What is the combination of these three factors of success, and how successful leaders actually make sure that performance, relationship, and motivation are there?
Well, what researchers say, right, scholars argue, is there are three key components to all this. The first one, in knowing what if your team is really performing, is of course the outcomes, the outputs. They have to look good, obviously. The two that get less attention are viability over time. You're not trying to rush to a deadline, and by then, as someone who teaches classes to degree students, like, let's just get to the end of the term, right? And then we don't have to see each other again. And yet, I find that to be remarkably consistent with what you see in corporate life too sometimes. Let's just get through these big projects and be done. That is not effective. And then the last one we've already mentioned, which is individuals have to benefit from their membership within that group, because if they don't, they're not going to put forth their best effort. And that's getting that right, that connection between, individuals need to win and the team needs to win. The fact that individuals win is part of what motivates them to do what's right for the team. So how do we align, those two together?
But in your research, you worked on the issues of conflict within the team, between subgroups, and the things you're mentioning are sometimes in conflict with each other. As authors writing about realistic conflict theory would say, conflict is not just a psychological issue. It's also an issue of real competition for resources, status, power. And in that sense, it's very hard to achieve all the three, right? You have a trade-off between short-term and long-term. You have a trade-off between collective and individual motivation and performance. How do you square this circle?
I think this question of high performance is a really interesting one in today's world, because obviously at the root of it, as you say, is achieving business results. That's why a team is created in the first place, to deliver a strategy. But we're operating in a real environment, I think, of instability and uncertainty. We had the COVID period where the role of organisations sort of also became familial, and looking after individuals, sort of pastoral care. And coming out of that, we're now seeing a very rapid trend towards return to work or return to office mandates, and a much more challenging relationship. So I think this question of what is high performance, for me, is a balance between absolutely achieving results, team health in the sense of that engagement with the organisation, but also the behaviours that we're demonstrating to achieve those results. And I think as we think about sort of social governance and how we demonstrate that the organisation is also benefiting wider society, that question of how we deliver results and how we behave internally and with clients is extremely important, and something that for leadership development is, I think, an ongoing challenge about how we best demonstrate care for broader society in the way that we go about our work.
Yeah, well, sustainability, right, is a word we all talk about, and we're using it to apply to things like the environment, but it totally applies to culture and the way we interact. Is this a culture that we can sustain over time, or is it burning people out, right? We've got high turnover, or we can deliver to a particular event or crisis, and then it all falls apart. The great team is one that can continuously deliver, throughout.
Yeah.
For me, that's the most important indicator of all, is that over time kind of measure of it.
I think what would be really interesting for me as a people leader, I'm fascinated to watch how we evolve the way that organisations are valued, kind of from a market cap perspective, and what progress we're going to see there in the value of performance cultures. And we all know, you've given examples of organisations where getting culture wrong can be catastrophic for the performance of the organisation overall and for the well-being of the people within it. And we've seen what that means for the financial value of an organisation sort of very transparently, but it still doesn't appear to be something that is evidentially driving value, financial value.
I would love to agree with you, because in principle, market capitalization should capture all the future performance ad infinitum, and then Randall's point about sustainability and long-term success should be reflected in the share price. The problem, of course, is many of the issues we are talking about are extremely hard to measure and capture, especially for the outsiders, and markets sometimes may make a mistake, may be convinced by narrative pushed by the leader or by the reviewers on Glassdoor. So in that sense, I would love to say that market capitalization is a perfect measure or a mirror of how successful organizational culture is, but I can imagine that sometimes this view is biased upwards or downwards. Randall?
Oh, no, I'm just smiling because I 100% agree. And we can see where the markets get it wrong badly sometimes. And it can oftentimes happen. There's a great piece of research showing that more charismatic leaders are more likely to get investment in their firm, for example, and to maintain the stock price regardless of performance.
Or sometimes on a sunny day, right? Sometimes it's easier to raise capital for your firm on a sunny day. It's not even a charisma of a leader, and this is research by our colleague Gary Dushnitsky, which shows that. It's not even you, it's just the outside environment which helps you, and sometimes it's not the culture, it's just the weather which changes in this country so often.
I'm realising I'm raising this point with a renowned economist.
There's at least as much noise in that measure as there is in the traditional kind of psychological measures that I deal in, which, for people who come into when I'm teaching, they will at times say, well, look, but tell me how to quantify it in a way I can quantify cash. And it's just not possible. Okay. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it's probabilistic kind of a measure. So
our listeners would like to follow up on this. So you cannot measure it, but you can still do it in a stochastic or probabilistic way. What is the piece of advice you would give our listeners on how to solve this problem? How to do that, Helen?
I ran my own advisory business for a period of time, and part of the work I did for growing organisations was to help them define a cultural statement of what they wanted their organisation to be. They'd received investment. What were they going to do with it? What kind of environment were they creating for people to deliver their mission and strategy? So reflecting on what you think that is within your organisation and how closely it aligns to what's written in your annual report, and to look at the cultural signals. Try to suspend belief there that you work in this organisation, but just spend a day observing and watching and noting what you see and reflecting on how comfortable you feel about those signals. And that could be very small things like the accessibility and visibility of leaders, how much time you spend in meetings, how people deal with disagreement. Those sorts of signals will tell you something about organisational health and maybe how effectively people are collaborating together.
And sometimes reality is actually different from the written values, principles, behaviors, and culture as described by the leader.
Yes.
I think it's a 50-50 when they match or don't match.
That's almost like a probability of meeting a dinosaur outside of the Regent's Park. Either we meet the dinosaur or not, right? 50-50. So, but literally, what can drive this probability to be higher or lower? That's the question. Can you actually advise the leaders to increase the probability that the culture we announce is actually culture we live?
Well, I'm going to build on some of the things Helen talked about. First of all, you have to be able to articulate it, okay? Then you have to be able to find what are at least reasonable measures of it. And then you have to find, and the measures that won't be subject to easy manipulation or easy necessarily like access to senior management. So every organization in the world is doing employee engagement surveys. So I don't think I've met one that hasn't been, any time recently. But the outcomes of those are very varied, because if they believe that senior management will somehow know who said what, all you get is lots of smiles. If they believe that senior management won't get to know who said what, right, then you get something much closer to the truth. And I treat it like I treat Glassdoor. It's a particular view of it, but then you've also got to figure. So you have to figure out, this is what organizations doing employee engagement surveys are trying to do, and the instinct is right. It's just how they're conducted sometimes is it doesn't necessarily get them as much truth as I'd like to get.
I can imagine that as a CEO, I can imagine that running non-anonymous surveys is pointless, right? So I guess people can still figure out who said what in an anonymous survey that I can see, but overall, this feedback is only valuable if it's honest and it's actually,
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's definitely valuable. And actually, it's the most valuable part, in my experience, is the free text comments. Our last employee engagement survey had 2,400 and something.
You've read everything.
I have. Are you going to test me?
Now, people talk about AI a lot, how you actually ask ChatGPT to read it for you and summarize it for you.
Now I'm old school. Yeah. But 2,400 free text comments is a lot. And some of them were very, very well articulated. They'd taken a lot of time, so that was really valuable. But what we've added actually at Newton is reverse mentoring, which I think is a fantastic concept. We're an organisation that hires a huge number of graduates every year. These are super bright, brilliant minds, and they're coming into the workforce with skills that I certainly don't have. We're in a tech generation, and it's very important, I think, for senior leaders to have that insight of the younger generation, and to have some of your maybe experience or bias balanced. And we also have a very, very robust engagement network. So we have over 25 different representative groups that our leaders are working with and gaining insight from, so that we understand the pulse of the organisation. But nothing beats a good Q&A. I was Chief People Officer at Zopa, which is a digital bank, on a mission to be Britain's best bank. And we had an open town hall Q&A there at the time every week. And I think there's something that's very meaningful about a leader taking a microphone and being live streamed in front of 600 plus employees and being accountable for hearing their questions and concerns and responding to those in real time. Nothing beats that.
talking about this, you mentioned the word generation and generational changes. None of us, for our listeners, you don't see us, but for listeners, for our audience, I should say, none of us is in our 20s. So the generational changes are actually very important. Here at London Business School, the youngest students are pre-experienced masters. The oldest students are in their 50s or even 60s. So we do see a lot of intergenerational conversations, sometimes misunderstandings. To what extent the cultural shifts we are talking about today are generational shifts, and how can you actually incentivize, build purposeful teams with the generations that are different from ours?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think that the world is worrying and insecure for a lot of young people. I read the level of unemployment now between 18 to 24-year-olds is almost at 14% in the UK. I think it's very important for leaders to offer hope and some sense of inspiration that things are going to get better. And I think that younger people coming into the workforce want to be on a path of continuous learning. The world is evolving. The skills that organisations need are evolving. And I think young people need to feel that this is a place where they're going to have employment, but beyond their role, they're going to continue to learn and be developed and stretched and challenged. And I think leaders spend a lot of time worrying about the immediate concerns, of which over the last 5 years there have been many. But we're in such a privileged position to be able to design the workplaces of the future. And there are jobs that we don't know about today. We just simply don't understand yet how technology is going to continue to evolve. So I think, being open, listening and keeping fresh, keeping people learning is important.
100% agree with that. But I will also point out that there's also a life cycle thing going on. Great study that I always talk about in my classes, looking at how the 20-somethings were more focused on friendships, relationships, and if my friend leaves, I'll probably leave too, right? By the time you get into 30s, people are a bit more starting to get more serious and starting to get some obligations. So they really prove themselves. By the time you get into 40s, it tends to be a pretty productive kind of period. And then you reach the 50s where it's like, I've been doing this for a long time. I want a little bit more autonomy here. And by the time you get to 60s plus, it's, where do I leave when I finish? And the thing is, that study was done in the 1930s, right? It resonates today because there is also a life cycle. And what that means is that there are generational differences, the born digitals, who not seen the world in any other way, who don't really understand much about, or their idea of what a physical store should be is very different, right? You go to try things there, but I'm going to order them online, right? As opposed to what probably we all grew up with, right? If you want something, you go to the store, right? But as well, putting a 20-something-year-old in who's most focused on themselves, their relationships, and my friend leaves, I'll leave, with somebody who's in their 60s, who's worried about legacy, what do I leave behind, loyalty matters, etc., is always going to be difficult, right? And so I think you have to challenge both the generations, but also how we change. And I think it's we sometimes forget, if you're a little bit older, what you were like in your 20s is not what you're like now.
So in a practical way, can you share any ideas what leaders can actually do to create motivation for individuals and teams within an organization?
Well, I think a number of different ways. I think the one people jump to very quickly is financial rewards. So that's sort of, I think most people, when they're creating scaling in business, are thinking about how they can incentivize performance, targets, achievement of results with financial rewards. And I think that has their place, but actually very quickly those rewards are forgotten, I think, whether they're bonuses or other financial sort of incentives. I think the more meaningful ways to motivate teams is to understand how the individual's sort of emotional needs are going to be best fostered. And so whether that be through potentially learning opportunities, sometimes the opportunities to spend time with another leader in the organisation, or even spend time outside of the organisation through secondment to broaden their skills, can be super valuable. And I think lastly, adding to the culture of the organisation, we found certainly at Newton and at my last organisation, Zopa, one of the ways that people were really motivated was by having some influence over the environment around them and the culture and the way that that was recognised. So we had various recognition schemes that actually helped to highlight people who were bringing our values to life in the way that they delivered their results and worked with others.
We definitely do that at LBS. We actually run awards twice a year for this. But I would like to go back to the issue of learning opportunities, and especially outside the organization. In economics, there is always a debate when you provide employees with generic skills versus organization-specific skills. You essentially pay for employees' opportunities to find a better job, or even if not leave, and ask for a promotion or a pay raise. To what extent you think organizations should be as generous and altruistic when they pay for skills which can be applicable outside the organization?
I'm someone that's benefited from that in many ways, and I was obviously a scholarship candidate here, but I think that when you learn through your career that some of your professional experiences have a market value that maybe you didn't necessarily appreciate, and certainly my time at PepsiCo is one of those. But creating a really strong network of alumni is actually one of the best ways that you can showcase your company's reputation and brand more widely. So I think there should be a pride in seeing people flourish, and maybe that will take them outside of your doors, but very often that means they may come back in a more senior capacity with a wider skill set. So I think it's like a long-term bet.
Randall?
I 100% agree. That's exactly the point I was going to make is, there are some organizations that actually have alumni associations, right? McKinsey, of course, being the most famous one. Those people, the loyalty that generates, right, even though they've left, right, is priceless. And most organizations will have a variety of external stakeholders, right? And you've got people out there, on your side. It makes life easier for the organization. So I don't think that it's an all give, from the organization's point of view. I think they get kind of as well. And building on some of your other ideas there, much of what you talked about is what I think of as intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation, like money, wears off super quickly, right? And it's also really expensive. So, and there's a great piece of research I will highlight where one of my friends, colleagues, did a study showing if you ask managers what they think they value most, they will say, and there were some intrinsic and extrinsic, things like feeling good about what I do, learning and development are top of the list. And pay is on there, but it's further down. And things like praise from the supervisor, not particularly high. But what do I think other managers value? Okay, they will say money first, praise from supervisor second, right? Learning and feeling good, probably third and fourth for sure. And if you ask them, what do I think our workers want? Money by far, followed by, again, praise, followed by, feeling good about myself. So here's the irony. We create incentive systems based on what we think other people want, when in fact, and we think we're different from everybody else, when in fact we're mostly the same. And that intrinsic stuff is more powerful for most people, the vast majority of people. And good research in management showing, it's different, a little bit different by different countries, but people will take a small pay cut to work for an organization where they get those things.
That's so true. I advised Seedlip when I operated my own sort of advisory business. There were an organisation at the time looking to change the way the world drinks. That was actually their mantra, creating a non-alcoholic distilled spirit. And we had fabulously talented people who came to work for the organisation, not earning upper quartile salary, but because of that mission. And every week we would sit and discuss what they'd learned the previous week, and what their focus was for the week ahead, and how they'd spent time in nature. And that was a very simple thing that actually cost very little money, but created that weekly focus on learning. And sometimes that learning was related to their role, and sometimes it wasn't.
And sometimes extrinsic motivation actually crowds out intrinsic motivation. People feel, I'm paid for this, so probably this is not something to be feeling good about. So this is an issue about feeling good is a powerful incentive that we don't use enough.
Yeah, in psychology, we call this the over-justification effect, right? And, there's, again, great studies across the social sciences showing, like when your kid stops playing their musical instrument, right, and you offer them a weekly allowance, it's a great way to ensure they'll never really love music because they believe they're doing it for the pay.
So in the end of each podcast, we ask a signature question. So thinking ahead, what would be one actionable step that today's leaders can take to cultivate exceptional teams?
For me, it's this concept of glue, of creating social capital. I think that, certainly in my experience, what can make a difference between a modest performance within a team and a really high performance is the relationships between those individuals. And certainly at Newton, we invest a huge amount of time and energy in creating that social capital. We recognise that if people have trust, feel some emotional affinity with each other, work happens more easily, flows more easily, productivity is higher, and people actually have fun. And fun is actually a really important concept. We spend a lot of time at work. We should feel that some of that is enjoyable and that you're able to celebrate wins together. So we have a really wide array of different activities, ski weekends, murder mystery weekends. We bring all our employees together every summer for 3 days, and we bring their partners and all their children. And we do that because we believe that creates community. And it's never been more important, actually, in a hybrid working environment. We're a professional services firm, so our people are very often on client site. So that time together is very precious. But my advice to leaders would be get to know your people, understand a bit more about really excites them, engages them, shows a little bit of vulnerability and authenticity. And that should help to create some more glue that it's more than just work.
My advice would be pay attention to the dynamic within the team. It's easy to pay attention to the individuals, but you can have a collection of 5 or 10 individuals in a team, and you have a good working relationship with each one of them, but they don't get along, right? You've got conflict or whatever problems you may have. Pay attention to that. And, those kind of things are not the problem of any one individual. I told you to do something, you went off and did it poorly. I want to blame you for doing it poorly. You want to blame me for bad instruction. Neither of those solves the problem, right? There's a problem here with how we are communicating information. Focus on that.
And how do we observe that? How do we pay attention to that? Do we need to recruit an external consultant, a professor of organizational behavior, to tell us that this team is dysfunctional, this team's dynamics is not actually promoting mutual trust and cooperation? How to measure that?
I think you can figure this out through, you're probably doing an employee engagement survey. You may get data back at the team level. What kind of reports you may get. Although one of the studies I'm best known for is asking all the top teams of all the big hotel companies in the world, how much trust is there within your team? Now, all of the team all agreed, but the relationship between the CEO's assessment and everybody else's was 0. And I have replicated that in other types of teams. So you need to make the effort to find out one way or another. In the extreme form, maybe you want to go to somebody outside, but I think it's the fact you prioritize it, you make it to pay attention. Or even one of the other tactics I oftentimes use is shut off your ears and watch what's going on. Look for the nonverbals, because that is usually priceless. That's where people really give it away. And if you've never done that, try it on once. You'd be surprised, right? And, every time so-and-so says something, somebody else does the big eyeball roll. You're like, okay, this isn't a rational conversation problem. There's other things going on here. So I think things like that.
I would agree with that. Actually, my team spend one day a quarter just on the team dynamic and how it's working. But sometimes it's also by how much is written. the volume of sort of written exchange on solving certain problems rather than just picking up the phone and having a conversation is a signal.
Yeah. Too many emails?
Too many emails.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Randall, and thank you very much, Helen, for this fascinating discussion. Now, I would also like to thank all of you, our listeners, for joining us today. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback on today's discussion. How can organizations enhance motivation, strengthen sustainable relationships, and drive better results? Please do share your insights by commenting on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, by using the hashtag ThinkAhead. This is a Think Ahead in one word. And please do not forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode of our podcast. And for updates, please check london.edu/think. london.edu/think. This podcast is part of the Second 60, London Business School's 60th anniversary initiative, where we are tackling 6 global challenges that are shaping the future of business.